Hey, hope everyone's doing great tonight. Wanted to talk to you. We've been talking about our true identity and even the fact that God has a name for each one of us, and talking about some of the stories in the Bible about that. Just touched on the one about Jesus, how when he was baptized, it shows the Holy Spirit descended on him, and then there was a voice heard, and it was God's voice, and people heard it, and it was God saying, "This is my son, this is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased." And then I pointed out how right after that, then we see that he was led out into the wilderness, and that's where Satan tempted Jesus 3 times. And the first thing he did was he attacked Jesus' identity. In other words, he attacked that identity of beloved son. And so, kind of an interesting story. So, another one I wanted to tell you about tonight was many of you are familiar with the story of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know, Daniel in the lion's den, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire. They survived the fiery furnace, and there was a fourth person in the fire with them. And really great stories. If you don't know it, you need to go read it in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament in the Bible. But here's what I wanted to point out. This is really a story about identity theft, and I think identity theft is what happens to many of us along the way. I think as young children, most of us probably are born in our identity. That kind of makes sense. God knit us together in our mother's womb. He knew who He was making us to be. And so we probably are in our true identity. And then as life goes on, that identity begins to get stolen from us. And sometimes that happens innocently, sometimes we allow that to happen. But identity theft is something we all have to be aware of. And I'm not talking about your credit card, I'm talking about Satan and the world and lies and what people say and your experiences and all of these things tend to almost conspire against us and steal our true identity. And then we find ourselves, excuse me, we find ourselves as adults living in a false identity and struggling to figure out who we really are. And we'll talk about all of the results of walking in your false identity. And at some point, we're going to talk about what it means and the benefits of really being in your true identity. But what I wanted to talk to you tonight about is Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And in that story, Daniel, their names, they're from the tribe of Judah, so their Hebrew names are Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And I want you to see that we don't understand this in the American culture today. Names don't mean a whole lot. We tend to, as parents, we just kind of tend to pick cool names or names that sound cool. We don't always, some people maybe do, but we don't really think about their meaning. I'm not sure many of us really pray and ask God, what should I name this child? Or God, what is the identity of this child that you're about to give me? Maybe that would be something interesting that we could do. Maybe if you're expecting children, that's something maybe you can think about doing. But in the culture at this time, names had a huge meaning, and we know that they mean a lot to God. That's what we've been talking about. So their names were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel, the meaning of that name is God is my judge. Hananiah means God is gracious. Mishael means who is like God. And Azariah means God is my helper. So those are some really great names and the meanings of those names. Now, when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took the nation of Israel captive, and then what he did is he said, I want you to go and take some of the finest young men, the most handsome, the most fit, the strongest, the smartest, just the sharpest young men that you can find. I want you to bring them and begin to train them to serve in my court. And so Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were four of those, and these guys were friends. What's interesting, a lot of people don't know this, is they were probably between the ages of 11 to 13 when they came into captivity in Babylon. And so they were not very old. So think about a junior high kid or even a little bit earlier than junior high. That's how old these guys were. when this happened. And let's just give kudos to their parents, that their parents obviously had done a great job establishing these young men in their identity, who they were, and in their faith. And so we can even see that from their names. God is my judge, God is gracious, who is like God, and God is my helper. So when they were taken into captivity, then what we see is the Babylonians wanted to uh, basically steal their identity and try to disconnect them from their faith in God, and started to point their faith to the Babylonian culture and the Babylonian religions, which were all these false gods and idols. And so the first thing they did was they changed their name, and they changed Daniel's name to Belteshazzar. They changed Hananiah's name to Shadrach. They changed Mishael's name to Meshach, and Azariah's name was changed to Abednego. So what do these names mean? So Belteshazzar used to be Daniel, now Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar means Bel will protect, and Bel was a god that they worshipped. And then Hananiah became Shadrach, and Shadrach means the command of the moon god. And Mishael was changed to Meshach, and Meshach means who is like Aku, which is another god of theirs. And then Azariah was changed to Abednego, which means servant of Nego, and that's another god. And so you can see that they were trying to disconnect them from their faith in God. Their previous names all meant something to do with their faith in God, and they were changing them to be focused more on the Hebrew gods. Sorry for coughing so much. I don't know about you, but ragweed's in the air, and that's kind of hitting me. So you can see their names were changed, and then we can see they not only changed their names, then they wanted to change their diet. They wanted to change the way they dressed, the way they acted, the way they thought, and even their names. And so we can read that story. It's a pretty fascinating story. And we can read how Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were obedient, but they refused to cut off their faith from God, and they refused to worship other gods. And we can see some amazing, miraculous things then that happen. And what's interesting is Daniel gains great influence and actually becomes a very powerful leader in Babylon. And we can see all the way up until he was like 80 years old. He was serving, he was a friend to the kings, an advisor to the kings, and a leader, and was given a lot of power and authority. And so it's really a great story. But again, I want to focus on, parents, take note here that these guys came into captivity 11 to 13 years old. They had names that had something to do with their identity. They understood their identity. Their parents had done a great job of teaching them, obviously. And these were some amazing young men that were taken into captivity at 11 to 13 years old. And there was an attempt to change everything about them and everything that they were experiencing in order to change their identity. And they didn't give in. And so I think that's an amazing story. And we can look at that story and just go, wow, that's a cool Bible story. But the reality is we can relate directly to that story, because I believe that we were born, each one of us was born with our true identity and probably a name that God had in mind for us. Maybe we knew that, maybe we didn't. Most likely we didn't. But then as life happens, identity theft begins to happen, and we begin to drift away slowly from being and understanding who God made us to be and what his name is for us. And so maybe as an adult, we need to take time then to stop and think about, man, what is my true identity? How have I formed my identity? And what is the name that maybe God calls me? And I just want to remind you that our identity we tend to get our identity from what we've experienced in life, what people have said about us, and we tend to also get our identity from what we do for work, and what we own and who we know, right? So we get it from all of these things that we experience in life, rather than getting it from God, who is the one who created us, who is the one that knows every day of our life, okay? And so we need to go to him, find our true identity, and ask him what our name is, and begin to understand what that identity means. And then out of that, we can figure out what it is that we're supposed to do. See, we get that backwards all the time. We tend to get our identity from what we do, And what we really need to do is go to God and find out what is our true identity, and take our true identity then into what we do, right? See how we can flip that. So anyhow, I hope this story of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego kind of gets your attention, and how important names are, and how important identity is. And want to continue to talk to you about this. I've got a lot more to say, but we've already gone over 10 minutes tonight. And so we'll pick up in a couple days, maybe talk about some other names in the Bible, and also talk about how we can regain what was stolen from us in regards to our identity. And here's the other thing for parents: don't forget. I wish that somebody would have helped me figure this out when I was a teenager, or certainly in my 20s. Now, this is no knock on my parents. I had amazing parents godly parents who raised me. I have no complaints. But this is something I want to do with my kids, is I want to begin to teach them their identity before they leave my house, so that when they go out into the world, they're established in their identity, and that way nobody can steal their identity. There won't be any identity theft. Okay, that's enough for tonight. We'll talk to you soon. See you.